Thanks, Dave. That was quite a good intro, actually. I'll take that. Whoever wrote that, they can get a raise. So thanks so much, everyone, for letting me join you. I'm sorry, I only speak English and I don't work in maritime, but if you'll allow me, I'd love to speak about one of my favourite subjects, which is hydrogen, a pick up on CCS as well. I won't draw too long on kind of what WSP do. We're an absolute behemoth of a company, so kind of a global multidisciplinary engineering consulting firm. So we're across energy, transport, infrastructure. I always say if you can think of it, we can probably do it, but that's the consultant in me talking, I think. Next slide, please, AJ.
Give me a moment. I think it's.
That's me being cheeky and getting you to share my slides. Sorry.
Oh, hang on a second.
Oh. Perfect.
Okay, there you go.
Your dream, thanks. Yeah, so hydrogen impact. So yeah, the hydrogen economy is exploding. I have to say, not literally. There's always a safety concern, but I mean it's everywhere. My father's now taken to sending me articles about it, which is a sign that he's retired, I guess. So next slide, please. So what is low carbon hydrogen? Why are we all so excited about it? Essentially, it provides us a kind of cross-sectoral opportunity to replace our typically kind of high-emitting fuels with low-carbon hydrogen, which we can use in fuel cells. We can direct combust, internal combustion engines, I think as our speaker just said there. And actually, in terms of CO2 emissions, it's basically zero, depending from where your hydrogens come from. So currently, it's very much from reformation of fossil fuels and no kind of carbon capture on there, so it's quite high-emitting. But you hear people talk about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. That's why there's this kind of rainbow. So green is from renewable sources, using electrolysis to split hydrogen into water into its constituent parts. And then blue hydrogen is how we do it today, reforming fossil fuels, then capturing that CO2 on the back end and putting it basically back into kind of geological storage. Next slide, please. So it's very much seen as a new energy vector. So this little diagram here is kind of just showing the scale of it. And although that's kind of trying to show all the different ways it can be used, you can kind of pick out what those opportunities are in terms of port and in terms of maritime. So I think it's been picked up on, fueling for ships, be that hydrogen or ammonia, picking up again on that really nightmare of the kind of volumetric energy density of hydrogen. So ammonia perhaps being a better option there. The fact that we could have a new kind of import-export market from those kind of net exporters or importers, depending kind of on the natural resources that the countries have. Exactly as we've just picked up, the port vehicles, equipment, cranes, there's a big opportunity there. And then the fact that there's going to be vehicles that are fueled from hydrogen, and we've got massive hubs of transport in the port. So again, it's a refueling station. It kind of all nicely links up. I did actually have a look at Reunion Island, so I'm not just a kind of someone come from the UK and knowing nothing. I did see that actually there's location in Reunion Island where there's electrolyzer that's linked up to solar, kind of allowing that long-term energy storage. So when there's excess renewables, generate hydrogen. When you don't have enough renewables, put the hydrogen to fuel cell and then produce power from that. So that's a perfect example of fitting hydrogen in with the kind of renewable sphere. And then picking up the infrastructure piece, there's that point, we've got LNG terminals. Can we convert them to liquid hydrogen? There's a challenge there in the fact that liquid hydrogen is actually stored at -273 degrees Celsius versus kind of -210 degrees Celsius for LNG. So there'll be a bit of a piece there in terms of adapting the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Right, so as I was saying, that kind of energy density challenge. So these are the three kind of mediums that they're looking at in terms of, well, let's convert hydrogen to gaseous hydrogen to these to kind of get around that challenge. So ammonia is the one that we're finding in our projects that our clients are kind of most interested in if they're doing a kind of large scale green hydrogen export, just because it's got its benefits in that it's got kind of an established distribution system and technology. So it's used for fertilizer just now. So it's already being shipped around. There's potential for it to actually be an energy vector in its own right, used in engines or even, again, supplying the fertilizer industry, but actually just a green product rather than fossil fuels. The issue being it is highly toxic and can really, cause some damage if not handled safely. But, a lot of fuels do have that issue, So liquid hydrogen, another option, but is benefits in terms of energy density. Challenge is that it's a very energy intensive process, thus it's got high operating costs, and then you need to store it at -273 degrees Celsius. So we know that's going to be a hefty bill to keep things at that temperature. Then finally, the kind of least developed, these LOHCs, you hear them called, liquid organic hydrogen carriers. LOHC is a bit more catchy. So they're very kind of early doors in terms of their commercial development. But again, it's just that benefit in that it's liquid state at broad temperature range, so it's just easier to store, easier to move around. And that's what we need to consider when we are shipping hydrogen as a kind of export-import product. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd be remiss to not kind of pick up on some of the works that are going on in terms of actually utilizing hydrogen and ammonia within vessels. So it is early days, like absolutely. There's kind of a few first of a kinds in Europe. I've accidentally chosen all kind of Norwegian examples here. Basically, you can tell I kind of did a project for the Norwegian office just recently. So again, it's that kind of benefit of ammonia as a fuel, in that you're not then having to store it at cryogenic conditions. And it's got increased energy density. And then if you can just kind of use it in a fuel cell, solid oxide fuel cell, then you're laughing, you're not losing any energy penalty by having to convert that back to hydrogen. So it's great. There's loads of things going on, but it's we're not going to see a big Maersk kind of freight liner hydrogen ammonia fuel in the short term, but it's definitely kind of a long-term picture of how it could go. Next slide, please. To sort of pick up on this kind of cool new import-export market, one was good of refreshing my knowledge of flags. So I'm trying to show here what the kind of net importers and exporters will look like. So the exporters obviously are the ones that, in terms of blue hydrogen, have access to cheap, ample natural gas, and then the carbon capture infrastructure, the latter being the more challenging bit. In terms of the exporters, because they've got green hydrogen potential, that's just access to cheap renewable energy. So that's kind of your Latin Americas, Africa, Morocco's entry into a few deals. You've got the Middle East, and then Australia, New Zealand as well, kind of blue and green opportunities there. And who are these kind of importers going to be? So Germany is again making quite a lot of deals in terms of trying to get a few. They're having imports of hydrogen in their hydrogen strategy, so they're really into it. And then there's the other countries that are more, what, we want to be self-sufficient, we're going to make enough for us to kind of use it. And France and China are making kind of noises around that sort of approach. So it's really interesting. There's actually only been kind of one international import of LH2 currently. That was in 2021. But again, it's just that indication of kind of the future piece. So it's pretty cool to keep track of. Next slide, please. One more, thank you. So I'll just nip over to CCS now. They kind of, they're not always linked to hydrogen and CCS, but they do get kind of put into the same bucket quite a lot. So CO2 transport via ship. Basically, your preferred, your cheapest method is always going to be to move things via pipeline, unless it's thousands of kilometers. But there's not always that opportunity. Some CO2 capture clusters aren't going to have access to that underground storage. It enables you to link them up. It enables you to gather CO2 from several locations. So CO2 is actually shipped around just now, but it's really small volumes in comparison to what we might need, because obviously it's used in the food and beverage industry. But the kind of in the scale of kind of 1,000 tons. We're looking at now some of the projects we're looking at, it could be up to 30,000 to 50,000 ton kind of tankers needed. So it's a scale difference. So there's kind of two approaches to that, about kind of delivering it to an onshore facility that has a CO2 pipeline out offshore, or actually direct offshore injection into a kind of storage site. The second one kind of being much less proven, and the first kind of looking like it'd be the more kind of simple method. So to move on to the next slide, I'll just show that kind of what that supply chain could look like. So you'd have your CO2 coming in from a kind of large point sources, liquefy that, and again, in terms of to enable the storage of it and improve that storage density. You're probably going to need to have buffer storage between your liquefaction and your carrier, so your ship. Load it into your ship, wash it to the import terminal that's probably got a pipeline offshore into an underground reservoir, and then you're going to gasify it, put it into that pipeline, and then store it there for eternity. Otherwise, there'd be quite a large lawsuit on someone's hands. Go to the next slide. So just to give an indication of who's again making noises about this sort of stuff. So I mean, there's an abundance of CO2 kind of announcements and projects in the mix, but there's only a few that are really talking about, well, we want to enable ourselves for shipborne transport. And what you see is the common theme in all of these is obviously the North Sea is at the center of all the kind of CCS deployment in Europe. And you see that storage capacity of kind of 300 gigatons of CO2 compared to Europe's emissions of around, or European Union's emissions of around 3 gigatons per annum. You can see there's quite a lot to work with there. So with the North Sea, you'd be storing it in kind of depleted oil and gas reservoirs or within saline aquifers. Benefit of oil and gas reservoirs is there's can be an opportunity to reuse existing pipelines that are going from in there already, so just repurposing them for CO2. So to pick up on a couple of kind of key ones, Northern Lights, again in Norway, I've really got to get a life about Norway. This project is one of the kind of first developed ones, so it's meant to complete mid-2024, and they are going up to actually have this kind of cross-border piece, kind of all legislation and regulation permitting, but hoping to receive CO2 from multiple European sources. We have clients in the UK that are speaking to Northern Lights about this, so it's very real and it is happening. And it's in the UK, it's how we'll need to link up some of our clusters in the parts of Southampton and South Wales are kind of our two that are big industrial clusters, but don't actually have that link to offshore storage yet. So final slide, we might just be in time. I realized just earlier that I did not have a summary slide, which would be a cardinal sin. So the summary really is, we know the port's impact of net zero. We know that the sector has to reach net zero, but alongside that, it's just essential in facilitating that energy transition, absolutely necessary. And making sure the adaptation of the infrastructure and accounting for, perhaps these new import-export markets. But it really is just a incredibly exciting time to be in the industry. That's how I'm finding it anyway. And that's me. Thanks so much. I'll take. We might be out of time, but if you want to contact me questions-wise, then I should be easy to find on LinkedIn. So thanks so much.